you're an autistic person. You will have a unique story and some unique experiences. Why don't you tell us about those experiences, and particularly in relation to parenthood, and what your thoughts are?
The driving force behind my life has been my family. Now, I was brought up in a home where there really wasn't an awful lot of love going on. There really wasn't an awful lot of acceptance. And I didn't have a particularly happy childhood. Now, when I had my children, like most people, when they have kids, they want their kids to have something they didn't have. I wanted something a bit more fundamental for my children. I wanted them to grow up knowing what it was to be loved and to be accepted. I wanted them to go to bed at night feeling happy, feeling satisfied with life. I wanted them to grow into adults and look back on a childhood full of happy memories. Because as far back as I can remember, I was crying myself to sleep at night. I didn't know why. I think since I got my autism diagnosis quite a few years ago now, I realised that those times I was probably crying myself to sleep at night because I was just that the whole day had been so incredibly overwhelming. I used to have nightmares, and I was thinking, why don't people just love me? And I think the best thing that you can ever do for your children is to bring them up in an environment where they're loved and they're accepted. And that's what I wanted for my children. And my journey as a parent hasn't been easy because I didn't really have a good starting point. So what I did was I looked around and modelled myself on parents that I admired and parents who were involved with their children. I didn't really know an awful lot about parenting. I got my first son in my arms, and it was 5 days before my 22nd birthday. And I looked at him, and I, like a lot of parents, I think, hell, what do I do with this? So as he grew, I grew. I tuned into him. I understood him. I knew what worked for him. And we had a really good relationship. I understood his behaviour. I understood his little quirks. I knew that when he was being a bit of a pest, he wasn't demanding my attention. He just needed something to do. As an autistic person, and not knowing I was autistic, I recognised that I had a great deal of difficulty dealing with change. Now that's a big trait with autistic people. If we have changes that are imposed on us, that are a sudden surprise, then you can expect quite a negative response to it. But we need to have things in a context that we can understand and that we can fathom.
Do you think then that having autism made your sort of experience as a parent more difficult?
When I look back at my older two, no, I don't think it did. I think to a great deal of extent, it made life a lot easier because what I didn't know, I didn't know I was autistic. So neither did I know that my eldest son was. So what I did for him was I prepared him for changes. The assumptions that we make aren't necessarily what our children are assuming. We can't take for granted that they understand things the way that we do. So I think relating to him as autistic person to autistic person is probably a whole lot easier. But when I got to a certain point in my life, my marriage broke down. And I was the one who left home, again, because I didn't want to change any more in my children's lives than I absolutely had to. So I left my children at home. So they were living in the same home, in the same surroundings, in the same neighbourhood. They were sleeping in the same beds. They were going to the same school. As far as I saw it, the only thing that was different was that I wasn't there. But I got to a point in my life where I really felt worthless and useless. and I genuinely thought my children would be better off without me. So I ended up in another relationship, a bit too quick, a bit too soon, and I got pregnant. And when my youngest son was born, it very, very much mattered. My autism came, it was significantly unhelpful to me at the time, because I found myself involved with the social services in a system that I didn't understand, facing the possibility, the very, very real possibility that my baby would be taken off me and it'd be forcibly adopted. I didn't want him to be adopted. He had a head injury that could have killed him, and there were 2 likely perpetrators of this injury, and I was one of them. And I was in a situation where I couldn't prove that I hadn't done it.
Do you think that because you were and are an autistic person, do you think there were assumptions made then that by the system or by the social services or those involved? Did you feel that there were some assumptions or some sort of automatic conclusions that were jumped to because of the autism then?
Not because of the autism, because nobody knew I was autistic. But what was obvious was that I didn't really understand what was going on. When I was told that my son had a non-accidental head injury, I thought a non-accident was a bit like a non-event. So I thought if he hasn't had an accident, then he's ill, he'll get better, I'll be able to take him home. This is when he was 6-7 weeks old and we were in the hospital, and that the police and social services were waiting in a room and opposite in the hospital over the corridor from where our room was, and they were waiting to interview us. It was absolutely awful. But what I did find was that I was playing a game and nobody told me the rules. And it seems to be that there's a script. Now, if you haven't done this, then we expect you to behave in this way, this way, this way, and this way. But nobody told me that. Because I was supposed to guess, I was supposed to just know. And of course I didn't. And because I'm autistic, I look at life in a different way. I take a different approach on things. And it didn't help. It clearly must have worked against me in a very significant way. When you can't even appoint a solicitor to represent your own child, you know the system. Is there something a little bit going on there? It was a horrifying position to be in. But there was an awful lot that I didn't understand. I can remember the guardian ad litem, which is the social worker who's appointed to speak in the best interests of my son because he was under 10, couldn't speak for himself. He was effectively my son's mouthpiece. And he said to me, "You're an intelligent, articulate woman. How can you not understand what's happening?" And that's just because I'm wired differently. But can I tell you something, Richard? The wider implication of this is not me and not the situation I was facing, but it's other autistic people who face situations like this where they're coming into contact with the authorities and they're not responding in these prescription ways. They're not playing along to these unspoken, unwritten rules either. How many other autistic people, how many other disabled people are being put into situations where their right to parenthood is being eroded and stripped away simply because they're different?
How did you? I'm quite interested in a point you made earlier on. So, when that sort of representative was there and made the point that you're an intelligent, articulate person, how do you not understand, or how is it possible for you not to understand what's happening and what the sort of implications of this are? What was your response to that question?
The whole background of everything, that I couldn't understand why anybody would deliberately hurt a baby. I didn't understand why anybody had hurt their own child that way. There is nothing in my behaviour that's demonstrating that I'm dangerous. You've seen me. Oh, you've observed me. I'm in this mother and baby home. Everything I say and do gets written down in a book. All of the records are saying I'm engaged, I'm involved, I'm a decent parent. Why do you think that I could have hurt my baby? And the response I was getting was, I don't know. Maybe you could tell us that. It was awful.
When did autism for you become a possibility?
Right, we've got to wind forward a few years. When my youngest son started school, he started having a lot of issues with school. A lot of behavioural issues started coming out that prior to that I hadn't seen. And so we'd gone around a lot of different professionals and experts, stuff like this, and it seemed to be that the response I got, well, he's only 5, and oh, it's not easy bringing up a child on your own, is it? And I was looking around and thinking, well, why aren't there more school-age children walking the streets during term time then? I am not the only single parent. I am not the only person who's bringing up a child on their own, yet I can't see evidence of other people's infant school-age children being excluded from not 1 school, but 3. Or was I such a terrible parent? And I didn't really think that I was. He went to a special school when he was 7. Yes, there is more detail about this in the book. But it only went up. He couldn't take GCSEs there. He had to move to another school. Now, in the past, a couple of people had said to me, who were independent of each other, he's got traits of Asperger's syndrome, he's got traits of autism. So I said to school, look, he's gearing up, he's got to leave school, he'll go somewhere else at some point. I did not want another school placement to fail. So I want it looking at again. So he went to see an educational psychologist who was referred along there. And the educational psychologist had a session with me. Then he spoke to my son. We had to go back a couple of weeks later to see what this professional had concluded. And he said, your son can't be autistic because he can talk and he knows what patronising means. Okay. Right. So I was a bit bewildered by that. But that's what I was told. So on the drive home, I said to my son, like, well, what was all that about then? And he said, but Mum, he was patronising. So yeah, I decided I wasn't satisfied with that. It was getting more urgent. He had to move schools. So I thought, you know something? I'm not going to wait for other people. I'm not going to just say, okay, yes, and nod and smile at these professionals who thought I was a terrible parent. I'm going to do some research. So off I trotted. I looked on the internet. I was looking up autism. I was looking up different books and publications, and there were 3 that really stood out at me. Just the title of the books, I thought, that's me, that is me. So I bought the books, I read them, and I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't know women could be autistic. I didn't know adults could be autistic. I knew nothing. So I was absolutely amazed. I was like, if this is it, if I'm autistic, then my family are going to come down like skittles. So if I get my diagnosis, if I get diagnosed, it'll help my son to get his. So I was open with my children about this. I said, look, I think this is what's going on here. I didn't say wrong or deficient, defunct or anything. I think this is what it is. So I got my diagnosis, and I went back to my son's school. I had a great relationship with my son's school. They absolutely loved me. And I said to them, look, I just found out that I'm autistic. My official diagnosis was Asperger's syndrome, which is still autism. And I said, I want it looking into again. So 8 months after I got my diagnosis, my son got his. And somewhere during that time, my eldest son, who's 10 years older than his half brother, phoned me up and said, Mum, do you think this is what it is? Do you think this is what I've got? And I was going like, yeah, I definitely do. It took him a bit longer to get his diagnosis. But I was, I was right. My family just did come down like that. My daughter didn't want to go forward for a diagnosis. She didn't want a label because that's how she saw it at the time. Fair enough. But I did help my sister, one of my sister's daughters, to get diagnosed, because it's quite common in families. If you get one autistic person in the family, it's extremely likely that there are going to be others. And that's really important to remember.
If you could go back to that sort of 21, 22-year-old self, or you could talk to another young person who maybe, is just having a child and also is a person with autism, if there was another you that you could speak to now, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say definitely that there is no reason on this earth why an autistic person cannot make an amazing parent. I don't know whether I was amazing. I have an amazing story. But if you want to ask whether I've been an amazing parent, there are 3 people on this planet you need to ask. And that is my 3 children. I think what we have to remember is that we owe a gratitude to our children. Because without our children, there wouldn't be that person on the planet who can look at you and say, Dad or Mum, and forget the experiences that you've had. Because if you've had a lot of bad experiences from your own parents, then find positive role models and find a way of making your children's experiences of life a lot better than yours. At the end of the day, it's not the cleverest, it's not the prettiest, it's not the smartest person, it's not the person with the most money who does better in life, it's the confident ones. So whatever you do is build that confidence in your children so that they can walk into the world with their heads held high. That's the biggest advantage you can ever give your kids.
And if people want to find out more about your experiences or your book that it was only published, was it last week, I think, was the publication date? How do they get hold of more information? Where can they get the book from? If there's something in this interview that's resonated with them or they're just interested, what should they do? Right.
The quickest way to get hold of a copy would probably be to buy it directly through me. And I put our contact details up when I edit the video. So yeah, it's called Travelling by Train, The Journey of an Autistic Mother. I guess because I know people spell my surname wrong, is I come up pretty much straight away. I come up straight away if you put my name in, if you spell it right, I come up straight away on Waterstones. But to get to Amazon, if you put travelling by train, the journey, it tends to bring you up straight away with that one as well. So yeah, if anybody who buys it through me, it's exactly the same price. That's the back cover. It's exactly the same price as it is through Waterstones or through Amazon, except that inside the front cover, inside here somewhere when I can find it, is here. I put a personal message just for you in there, and I put my contact details. So I like to make it really personal because it's my way of saying thank you for buying my book.